Okay, can we start it, Melissa? Or should we wait a little bit?
They're coming in, so just wait 1 minute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, welcome to the official kickoff of this year's Penn State Traffic Engineering and Safety Conference. I live in Southern York County, and appropriately, it was snowing here about an hour ago. And what would a traffic engineering and safety conference be without snow? So thank you for joining the meeting. We're going to talk about the FREEVAL-PA, which is a new tool that PennDOT has developed, and we, Kittleson, have helped them to develop it. FREEVAL-PA is an analysis tool developed by PennDOT, and it uses the computational engine based on the Highway Capacity Manual 6th edition. It provides a more detailed output than current spreadsheets and tools, a streamlined analysis process compared to simulation. It offers consistency and analysis across all the districts. It provides analysis support for the lane reservation system that PennDOT is developing. And it has numerous applications beyond the work zone analysis, including alternatives analysis. And we'll get into a lot of this as part of the presentation. It also allows for rapid iteration of analysis for decision support. The plan for FREEVAL is to go live early in 2021. We're trying to get the website approved through PennDOT's IT department, and there's some security concerns, legitimate security concerns that you can imagine. There will be a strike-off letter that will come out in the first 3 months of next year. And in the meantime, you can use the tool. Shannon will be our first presenter, and she will show you the staging website that you can go to use the tool. The FREEVAL-PA tool is similar to the delay analysis workbook that requires a lot of fields to be entered. Here, a lot of things are pre-populated, so it's much more user-friendly. So presenters today will include Shannon Warshall, myself, Alexander Jean Lee, Bastian Schroeder, and in addition, Dan Farley and Brian Crosby from PennDOT will be available at the end to respond to any questions that you might have. We are going to hold all the questions until the end, so if you have anything, let us know at the end. At this time, I will introduce our first presenter, which will be Shannon Warshall. Shannon is a senior engineer at Kittleson and Associates. She has worked with local, state, and federal clients to develop solutions in operation and safety. Shannon has led projects investigating flashing yellow arrows, leading pedestrian intervals, offset T signalization schemes. She has served as a trainer for several courses, including DDI signal timing, a PE prep course, and FREEVAL-PA. In addition, she currently just started a project for PennDOT on smarter intersections. Shannon is working with PennDOT's HISTO division to understand and prioritize traffic engineering training needs statewide. She's located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Shannon.
Great, thanks, Ed. Looks like I was still muted. The presentation is going to be given in 3 parts. I'm going to start out here with just a general overview of FREEVAL. So the first thing to know is our FREEVAL team. We have a group of 6 staff who have worked to develop the FREEVAL product for Pennsylvania. You'll hear from Alexandra, Bastian, Ed, and me today. Glenn Rowe also helped on this program, and many of you know Glenn lives in Hershey, and then Lake Trask worked as the developer for the course. So if you have any development requests, Lake will be the one to target those. Our 3 parts of our presentation today, we're going to start with an introduction to FREEVAL. Alexandra is then going to talk about the sketch planning method and give some examples of those. And then Bastian's going to wrap up with examples from the detailed analysis method. As Ed mentioned, there is a website available before you start jumping on your Chrome browser and looking for FREEVAL-PA.com. As he mentioned, we're on a staging website right now while we get approval and before we hand it over to PennDOT officially. So if you want to explore on your own, go to staging.freeval-pa.com. Also on the website, there is a multitude of training modules for you. So a lot of the material from today will be in the training modules, but there are additional modules beyond what we're presenting today. So there's 5 modules on the website. So no need to kind of scramble to take notes here. Everything that we're presenting today, you can find again in the training modules. There's also a discussion board on the website for questions and discussion of folks across the state. There's a documents and downloads site for you as well. And the whole system runs on a login. So when you get to staging.freeval-pa.com, it will ask you to create a login. It's a very quick process. There's no cost involved or anything. But then once you go, that will allow you to engage in the discussions forum, and it will track where you are in the training if you want to stop and start again. So the FREEVAL-PA tool is split into 2 parts. So there's the sketch planning piece and the detailed analysis. Alexandra's going to go in depth in the sketch planning, but the sketch planning is just a volume to capacity screening. So it's meant to be a very high level, quick analysis. It provides you with your volume to capacity ratio, or V/C. You can evaluate a few different work zone scenarios, different work zone staging, and it helps inform that lane reservation system. You can also do some work in diversion sensitivity testing, but it's really meant to be a high-level scenario planning. So it's quick. You can run through a scenario in under half an hour, but there's not a if you want to get into things that are more detailed, more in-depth, then you'll need to switch into the detailed analysis. Bastian's going to be presenting on the detailed analysis today. That is based on a calibrated facility. We've preloaded a lot of information for roadways throughout Pennsylvania. In the detailed analysis, you can get outputs such as delays, queuing, user costs. It allows you to look at more detailed TSMO and alternative analyses than you can see in the sketch planning. And you can also look at options for incident and reliability analysis. So a quick view here of what the sketch planning tool looks like. This is one of the screens that you will see in the tool. Up here, you have a summary of your work zone configuration. So you can select if you have a lane closure, a shoulder closure, what the capacity adjustment is for that. And then the chart here provides a description of your base demand here in green, and then additional information about what your capacity is under your 2 work zone scenarios, work zone 1 and work zone 1 and work zone 2. On the right, you can see hours where your demand to capacity ratios may be starting to creep up, between 0.85 and 0.95 is in the yellow, and then above 0.95 is in the red. And Alexandra will talk through all of this more in additional detail. The detailed applications you can see already from the screenshots provides more opportunities for inputs and outputs. There are additional, you select the actual pieces of the network that you would like to analyze. Those were all preloaded again. And then in your output section, you can see things such as what percentage of the day or of your segments are at various levels of service. You can see some of these graphical representations of queues or delays or travel times, many ways to kind of view the output from your analysis, and Bastian will cover that. I want to take a minute to talk about the policy implications of FREEVAL. As Ed mentioned, this will be rolling out in the first 3 months of 2021. So here we say January 1st, 2021. That may be pushed back slightly, but the implications are the same whenever they do roll out. So for department force maintenance projects, the evaluations will be performed by the district traffic or maintenance staff, and they'll receive approval as needed by the district traffic engineer prior to conducting the field activity. Now, if you have, if your district has multiple activities that are all happening, but they require the same general work zone setup, that analysis can all be done together. For department construction projects, the evaluation is performed by the design staff, and approval is needed from the district traffic engineer prior to approval of the temporary traffic control plan. For business partner maintenance, construction, or permit projects, the evaluation should be performed by the business partner, and approval is again needed by the district traffic engineer prior to heading into the field for any activity. The publications that this will impact then, Pub 23, it's going to require maintenance supervisors and assistant county managers to consider lane and shoulder restrictions during their planning phase for limited access highways. All the pertinent information for proposed work zones will be provided to the district traffic unit for analysis. On Pub 282 for HOP, on limited access highways, the policy will require the applicants to submit a FREEVAL-PA analysis for all phases of traffic control plans. And then, of course, the updated design manual will contain policy language that requires FREEVAL analysis for any temporary traffic control that restricts lanes or shoulders on limited access highways. And again, Brian and Dan are available at the end of this presentation to answer any clarifications on this policy or other details, other questions you may have. Some use purposes then of FREEVAL. When you think about the world of tools, there are kind of 3 various levels. So we have a planning level tools, which require low levels of effort that can be done relatively quickly. You have deterministic methods, and those tools tend to be a little bit more involved than planning level tools, but the difference between planning level and deterministic is quite smaller than the level of effort difference between deterministic and microsimulation. So if you're thinking about those simulation projects, that requires a much more level of analysis and detail than your deterministic methods. When we're looking at where FREEVAL falls into this, FREEVAL-PA, that the sketch planning version, really falls under the planning level tools. It's a quick analysis, can be done from your desk in one session. The deterministic method is the FREEVAL-PA detailed analysis. We've done a lot of work to already gather as much input data as possible. So there's a statewide segmentation database that will be discussed later. And the FREEVAL method can be, but the important thing to know though is that the FREEVAL method can be applied at a significantly lower level of effort than microsimulation through VSIM or Transmodel or AIMSUN. So the difference though is that the FREEVAL is a deterministic software as opposed to a stochastic software like you would see in those modeling tools. So at a more granular level then, what's the difference between FREEVAL and the spreadsheets that we're using for the typical high-level work zone analysis? Both FREEVAL and the spreadsheets are equation-based, but FREEVAL more explicitly considers the freeway geometry. So it's considering the number of lanes, it's considering width of lanes, it's looking at the width of the shoulders. FREEVAL, as I mentioned previously, includes that segmentation database. So For those who are familiar with the HCM process, you have basic segments, weaving segments, and then your 2 ramp segments. Those are all, FREEVAL has already segmented the Pennsylvania highway statements, highway system, limited access system with that segmentation. And FREEVAL provides a more detailed output. Because of these more detailed inputs than the spreadsheets, we can get more detailed outputs. It also allows for evaluations of things like weather, incidents, TISMO, as well as capital improvements, right? So improving ramps, improving additional lanes, widening shoulders, those can all be evaluated in FREEVAL. On the other side of the spectrum, then, FREEVAL versus microsimulation, both are developed to evaluate congested conditions. So if you have queuing issues, FREEVAL can handle those. And they can both be used then to evaluate various scenarios or treatments for those congestions. The major difference is that FREEVAL is deterministic. So if you put the same inputs into FREEVAL, you will always get the exact same output. For those familiar with microsimulation, you know that you have to go through multiple runs. Because it is stochastic in nature, there's some random elements to it. FREEVAL, if you have identical inputs, give you identical outputs. So there's no random number generator in FREEVAL. FREEVAL, compared to microsimulation, has a streamlined analysis and calibration process. There is still calibration that needs to be done, but it is more streamlined. On the flip side, though, microsimulation can provide greater flexibility for evaluation. So FREEVAL relies on the fact that we know something about how the width of a shoulder impacts traffic or how the width of a lane impacts traffic. That data has already been collected, the research has been done, and so it relies on those values when it's calculating numbers. Microsimulation can look at complex or unusual geometries that maybe research hasn't focused on in the past, and it can look at the interaction of functional classifications. So FREEVAL is limited to the limited access roadways, whereas microsimulation can look at the interplay between the freeway, for instance, and an arterial, the ramps between them, any sort of queuing from the freeway onto the arterial or from the arterial onto the freeway. That can be analyzed in microsimulation. That kind of interaction is not possible in FREEVAL-PA. So talking through a couple of the advantages and limitations of the sketch planning, then, again, as I've mentioned before, advantages, minimal resources. You can look at initial feasibility. So if you're trying to work through, if you have a realm of options of where we're looking to close lanes, or should we close a lane versus a shoulder, and kind of trying to get your head around the 2 or 3 options you should really dig into more, sketch planning tool is great for that to help you pare down. You can explore the impact of future growth as well. So it's not just about currently congested situations. If we know we have future demand, we can explore that impact on bottlenecks. Because your inputs are rather limited, there are a number of simplifications and assumptions that are not appropriate for every situation. And it does not provide any delay or queuing outputs. Now, these limitations here, if you go into the detailed tool, those limitations can be addressed through the detailed tool. Alexandra is going to dig in more on the specifics of inputs and outputs, but again, here's just a quick overview of the types of inputs. And then again, you saw some of those output charts earlier, volume to capacity ratios, work zone specific volume to capacity ratios. Again, it's a high level strategy screening. On the detailed analysis, then, the advantages are it balances that detail needed with the output provided, that it kind of strikes the balance between the planning level tools and the microsimulation. It can consider the FREEWay as a facility with multiple segments, as I mentioned again, the basic weaving, merging, and diverging segments. It can provide those congestion metrics, and it can be used to explore various mitigation strategies, work zones, future growth. But again, the limitation is that it focuses on the system effects. It does not it lacks focus on the system effects. It does not look at the arterial interaction, and unusual geometries need calibration. Bastion will dive into specific data needs around the detailed analysis, but it's the same inputs as the sketch planning, but at a more a finer resolution. The outputs, again, speed, travel time, density, level of service, user cost estimations, and it will create a PDF report for you. So real quick on a limitation here, I'm sitting about a mile away from the Squirrel Hill Tunnel. Just as an example of maybe what would be more complex in FREEVAL. For those who aren't familiar with the area, we have a stop-controlled on-ramp that leads you merge into a lane drop. On that exit ramp, you actually have a weaving scenario, and then downstream of all this, you have the Squirrel Hill Tunnel, which has congestion issues fairly frequently. A situation like this has a lot of unique features where queuing can occur. You can analyze this situation in FREEVAL. You would need to be very conscious about the calibration, and you would need some field data to help you calibrate that. So there are many situations that can be analyzed in FREEVAL-PA, but again, and Bastion will really hammer on this, I'm sure, calibration is very important for these unique geometries. If to note, FREEVAL is based on the HCM methodology. So if there's something that is not addressed in the HCM methodology, it's difficult to address in FREEVAL. For example, the present HCM methodology does not have a method for evaluating these complex weaving segments with multiple on-ramps and off-ramps that, similar to the visual shown here. You would need to be careful in FREEVAL about how you would break these into subsegments. And again, you would need some ability to have some field calibration data. And the online modules really dive into this calibration process. So FREEVAL can be used for a number of different applications. Right now for Pennsylvania, I think the focus is going to be most heavily on work zones. And so a couple of things then focusing on work zones, you can look at, again, the various work zone scenarios. You can look at if you're creating your contracting requirements of what times a business partner can close lanes. FREEVAL is great for that analysis. Looking at the minimum number of lanes the business partner must maintain, also great in FREEVAL. If you're trying to figure out what a diversion target, so getting people off the facility, how many vehicles should we try and divert? Yeah, FREEVAL will give you that information, and again, the lane reservation system. Bastion and Alexandra are going to focus on a number of scenarios, hands-on examples, but I want to give a quick view here of US 222 north of Lancaster. So FREEVAL is not used to inform the scenarios for this project, but it could be. This is an example of where you could potentially use FREEVAL. So US 222 north of Lancaster, they were looking to complete some work on two bridges here, one at Glenwood Drive and one at Pleasant Valley Road. And so the question becomes, how should you set up your work zone staging? Or how should you stage your work zone? In FREEVAL, we can look at here is an example of there are 6 segments that have been closed, one lane closure for the northbound route. And we can see some quantitative results here. FREEVAL also provides visual results. So we can see on the left a normal condition. On the y-axis, we have time of day, so from midnight to midnight. On the x-axis, these are segments of the freeway. So northbound is headed to the right. Over on the right graphic here, we can see the work zone conditions. So on the left, normal conditions. Green means people are traveling near free flow speed. The red indication is much, much slower speeds. So the deeper in red you go, the slower the speeds. We can see here this segment highlighted with the red box is where the work zone began for Pleasant Valley Road. And you can see during the AM peak, we have slowing speeds in the 5 segments north of the work zone closure. So it kind of builds up to about 9:30 in the morning. And then as we get further into the morning, the speeds pick up. There's still a little bit of slowing on that initial work zone segment. In the afternoon, we can see that the reduced speeds will spread further down the roadway upstream. So more segments of the roadway will have reduced speeds. And you can see this graph here shows what the travel time will look like at various points in the day. That horizontal dotted line is the before condition travel time of about 14 and a half minutes. With a 10%, again, I was mentioning you can look at diversions. So with a 10% diversion, which is here in the green line, you can see that the AM peak travel time drops to less than 20 minutes. That PM peak is still up around 40 minutes, but it was reduced by 30%. If you can bump that diversion up even to 15%, then your AM peak sees no change in travel time. Your PM peak is cut by 50%. So this is a great these great graphics really tell the story about how different alternatives impact your travel time, your delays. There are various ways you can set up this graphic for the performance measure that you're interested in. The southbound results look a little bit worse. You can see more queuing. We're actually seeing that there is no, from the AM peak all the way through the PM peak, we're seeing reduced speeds. So the severity of the impacts in the AM do not reduce at all through the midday. They just continue and you build back up in the PM. In a scenario like this, FREEVAL is a great tool to help you look at what are some alternatives, right? If I close the one lane, the full length of the road from Pleasant Valley all the way to Glenwood, we're going to have some serious issues in the southbound. I'm going to get some calls, some complaints. What could we do instead? Here are 4 different work zone staging options, right? So close from bridge to bridge, like we just showed, close both bridges, but open in between, or do your bridge work one at a time. And FREEVAL can show you the various impacts there. You can see if we just close Glenwood by itself, not too bad. Closing Pleasant Valley by itself, the green line, still having some issues there. So maybe you found one option that works doing the Glenwood work on its own, but you'll need to do some additional analysis looking for Pleasant Valley and how to reduce those travel times there. So, so that's a overview of what FREEVAL can do and what that looks like. I'm going to hand it off now to to Ed, who's going to introduce our next segment.
Okay, our next speaker is Alexandra John Lee. She is in our Philadelphia office. She's a senior engineer with Kittleson and Associates with over 8 years of professional experience. Her technical experience incorporates elements of planning, analysis, safety, and engineering design. She applies her understanding of traffic engineering principles and her knowledge of design elements to develop transportation solutions for the community she works in. She also enjoys working on engineering tool and software development projects such as FREEVAL. As a member of the FREEVAL-PA project team, Alexandra contributed to the ArcGIS data conflation and processing for customizing the FREEVAL software tool for PennDOT. She also tested the PennDOT specific FREEVAL interface and assisted with writing the user manual and for the tool and developed training materials. As I said, she's based in Philadelphia, PA. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alexandra, who will talk about the sketch planning method. Melissa, can you unmute Alexandra? There we go.
Thanks. Couldn't unmute myself there. So now I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Screen 2. So today I'm going to share some more information about the FREEVAL-PA interface and also the methods for creating a facility in the program. Next, I'm going to move into the planning applications of the tool and share some on-screen demonstrations about those methods. So for the first portion, I will show how to download and install FREEVAL-PA. I will then discuss how to open an existing file, create a new facility, introduce the FREEVAL-PA interface, and how to navigate the interface. To download the program, you can download a Windows installer file from the FREEVAL-PA website. After you double-click this installer file, it will launch a guided wizard shown on the top right of this page. As you follow that wizard, you can specify an install location, and there will be admin privileges required. Once you process this installation, you can then, two items will be developed. You can have a desktop shortcut and also a start menu item, as shown on the right in the box in blue. Both of these can be used to launch the program. FREEVAL-PA can open files created with prior FREEVAL versions. These are shown in the yellow box on the screen. These are all prior Java versions of the tool. FREEVAL-PA is not compatible with the older versions of the tool because those are Microsoft Excel based. Now I'm going to talk through 3 ways that you can start a FREEVAL analysis. First, you can open an existing file created in FREEVAL-PA or one of those compatible versions I just noted. Next, when you're creating a new facility from the segmentation database, this is the best and preferred way to create a facility because this database includes a lot of the needed inputs that are desired for completing the analysis. And then the third option is to create a new facility using manual segmentation. When you use this method, it's probably because you're trying to analyze a new facility that does not exist today, or you're evaluating a study that's outside of the PA database. The FREEVAL-PA segmentation database contains an inventory of all limited access roadways in Pennsylvania. These roadways are segmented to conform with highway capacity manual segment definitions, as Shannon mentioned in the prior presentation. The database also includes some geometric and some traffic input data for each of these segments, such as segment type, segment length, etc. When you're creating a new facility in FREEVAL, the most reliable way to enter volume data is to specify an average annual daily traffic volume and also a 24-hour volume profile. On PennDOT's traffic information repository website, you can access AADT data. And then for 24-hour volume profiles, the FREEVAL-PA tool contains 3 default volume profiles that you can apply. For example, there's an AM peak profile and a PM peak profile. Both of these are routes with either a morning or afternoon commute pattern, as you can see on the slide. There's also a rural or weekend profile, which can be applied to a route that does not have a clear AM or PM peaking pattern. In addition, you can further customize these by applying the profile at a different level. So for example, an average profile, profiles reflecting a 15th or 85th percentile of applicable profile, or even a maximum pattern. And then it's possible to modify these even further in the analysis by specifying custom profiles in the detailed analysis part of the tool. Now I'm going to move into discussing some of the planning applications of the tool. And after that, I will dive into some hands-on exercises to demonstrate the tool. The FREEVAL-PA sketch planning method is intended to provide a high-level assessment of volume to capacity ratios by time of day. It does not provide delay or queuing performance measures and is not sensitive to segment geometries. But there are a variety of applications for this planning method, and it's really based on this quick turnaround assessment of volume to capacity patterns. The method only takes a couple of minutes to complete. It can be used as a pre-screening effort prior to moving into a more detailed FREEVAL analysis, or it can be used as a standalone analysis. It can provide a high-level assessment of work zone impacts, such as including lane or shoulder closures. And the planning method can also allow for conducting some sensitivity analyses. In the context of PennDOT's lane reservation system, the planning method also includes a corridor assessment tool. To understand the planning method and how the volume to capacity ratio approach is applied, it's important to discuss the definition of capacity. The HCM defines capacity as the maximum sustainable flow rate to pass through a freeway segment. And when capacity is field measured, it's typically expressed in units of vehicles per hour. In the context of the Highway Capacity Manual, capacity is expressed in units of passenger cars per hour. These two units differ for heavy vehicles, and when you're looking at the Highway Capacity Manual definition, each truck is counted as a passenger car equivalent, which could vary as a function of grade or terrain type. So for example, the truck equivalency factor for level terrain is 2, which means each truck is counted as 2 vehicles. And for steeper grades, the truck equivalency is higher. So just quickly showing an example of this, you can see on this slide, it's showing the difference between capacity in units of passenger cars and vehicles as a function of increasing truck percentages. The left table shows level terrain and the right table shows rolling terrain. And you can see that as the truck percentage increases, the 2 units are diverging because each truck is counted as either 2 or 3 vehicles. All of the calculations in the Highway Capacity Manual and then in FREEVAL-PA are completed in units of passenger cars. So it's important to understand this concept and the conversion if there's any field measure capacities from video or sensor data used to calibrate the tool. There's many more details and tables that document this in the Highway Capacity Manual. Now I'm going to briefly explain the FREEVAL-PA planning level capacity chart and then move into some demos. So this slide is showing the starting interface of the planning level method. The top of the interface is showing the input data for the sketch planning method. And we'll talk through that in some of the demos. The bottom of the interface has the outputs from the method. On the left, you can see a 24-hour demand versus project capacity ratio. The outputs are provided in a radial and a tabular form on the right, and you can dive into more of the details. These outputs allow for a high-level screening before conducting a more detailed analysis. So there's going to be 3 exercises to demonstrate how the tool can work. For the first exercise, we're going to look at a project-independent single segment planning analysis. And I'm going to kind of talk through the input data that's shown here, and then answer the following questions as we navigate the interface. So I'm going to now open up the program. And so as you see on my screen here, there is the FREEVAL-PA desktop shortcut. And then this box pops up when you first click on that program. It can select Open FREEVAL-PA. So for the first exercise, we're looking at a new sketch planning bottleneck analysis. So when we're looking at the screen, in the center of the tool, you can see there's a create analysis from PennDOT segmentation database. This is how you would access the database that I described earlier. You can also create a new analysis from a blank facility template. This is where you would select and access that part of the tool. You can open an existing analysis as well. For this part of the exercise, we're going to look at the project independent sketch playing analysis at the bottom of the screen and click go. So now we're interested in, and we'll move forward with the sketch planning segment bottleneck analysis. So on this part of the tool, you can see there, we're in the step 1 existing conditions section. We're going to enter some information about what we want to analyze. So first, we'll enter 50,000 AADT. We can modify the directional split to 0.55. We're looking at a PM peak profile, 5% trucks, rolling terrain, and 2 lanes. We're going to leave the other inputs as the default. You can then select Update Analysis, and you can see that the volume curve populates on the slide. So now we're going to look at some questions. So first question is, what is the maximum volume to capacity ratio for the present year scenario? So for the existing conditions, we can see that the maximum volume to capacity ratio is occurring in the PM peak time period. We can further analyze this by looking at the tabular form by clicking on the button to the right. If we scroll down to the PM peak time periods, we can see that around 5 o'clock, there is a 0.59 base capacity. And then the next question that we want to look at is, during which times would an 8% growth scenario be near or over capacity? To further look into this, we can access the growth scenario step 2 by clicking up here on the top left of the screen, or we can just select this next arrow on the far right of the window. To apply a growth scenario, we check this box and we can type the name of the growth scenario. Growth scenario number 1. Then we can apply a growth level. So I'm going to apply a custom growth level of 8%, 1.08, and then you select Update Analysis. Once you select that, you can see a new demand profile appears on this dotted line, and that's representing the growth scenario number 1. You can also see that another column is applied on this tabular form, and you can see that for that same time period, the volume to capacity ratio has increased. You can also go back and forth between the radial and the tabular form. And and what is the maximum V over C ratio in this scenario? Okay, yep, we looked at that and it's 0.60. Let's just apply one more growth scenario and just to see what the results are with a high 20% growth scenario. If I update the analysis, you can see how that increases. So for this, I'm now going to just move into the second exercise. This exercise is going to be a project-based segment level analysis, and we're going to open an existing file to start this exercise. And we'll dive into one segment within the existing facility. So let me navigate back to the program. I'm going to open up a new file. And so we can navigate to the center of the tool and select Open. and then navigate to a file. Once you select that file, you can see that the facility will populate on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. You can zoom in and out by holding Control and zooming with your mouse. You can select a facility, a segment of the facility, and see information about the segment. You can also scroll on the bottom of the screen here and select a segment this way. A third way that you can select a segment is by using this drop-down menu and scrolling down to a segment you're interested in analyzing. For this part of the presentation, we're going to look at the planning level performance of segment 20, and we're going to use the work zone segment staging part of the module. Once you select that, we can enter the information in the exercise. So we'll first enter 50,000 AADT, a directional split of 0.55. The demand profile is in the AM peak period, and the rest of the inputs are default from the file. For the purpose of illustrating some concepts, I'm going to modify that base per lane capacity value. So now I'm going to update the analysis. Similar to the previous exercise, you can see how the volume profile is applied. The first question is, what is the estimated max volume to capacity ratio without a work zone? And we can see here that the highest demand is occurring during the AM peak periods, about 7 a.m. We can further investigate this by looking at the AM peak period and see that it's close to 0.60. The next question is, what is the estimated max volume to capacity ratio with a shoulder closure? We can move into the work zone configuration step 2 to look into this. I'm going to apply the first work zone, and it will be a shoulder closure. So you can name that feature and then select a shoulder closure. You can also adjust the work zone capacity using this bar. Then we're going to select update analysis. So you can see that there's a second dashed line that appears, and this represents how the capacity has changed due to that work zone configuration. You can also see another column that's applied that represents that shoulder closure in the tabular form. The next part that I'm going to show is adding another work zone configuration. This one will be a lane closure. So when we apply this lane closure, we're going to update the analysis. And as you can see, the computed capacity for the facility has dropped below the demand curve. We can also see this in a tabular form that now that same time period is at 1.40, which is far over capacity. You can also illustrate this in the radial form, and you can see that in the red areas, it's showing the V over C ratios that are over capacity. The yellow is where they are near capacity, between 0.85 and 0.95. I'm going to quickly show the diversion tool. If we click that button, we can show that, let's say for diversion scenario 1, that we apply a 20% diversion on this segment. We click update analysis. We can see a new profile appear. This is the diversion scenario number 1. You can also see, if you click on you can toggle between the existing conditions and the diversion scenario and see that for the lane closure, in the AM or in the PM peak hour, it is not over capacity, it's near capacity. You can also visualize this If I scroll down to the PM peak hour, you can visualize the difference between the diversion scenario and the existing conditions in a more detailed form. With that, I'm going to now move into the third exercise. And for this exercise, we will also explore an existing file and then look at a corridor level planning analysis. And we're going to enter some information about a one-lane closure and then answer a couple of questions about how we can navigate the tool and look at different features of this performance section. So now let me get back to the program. And I'm going to reopen that file. So I'm going to click home and we can proceed and then navigate, and I'll open the file this time through File, Open Project. And I will select that file again. Okay, so for this part of the tool, you can see that we're on the same screen that we just had. In the top left corner, there is the facility. And instead of selecting a specific segment, we're now going to move to the corridor analysis work zone corridor planning module. So we can select go on the screen here. Now we have a different screen where it shows the facility at the top of the window. And then on the bottom of the screen, we have each segment across the top of the window. And this is showing the 24-hour demand to capacity chart. There's also the time on the left-hand side of the window. You can hover over each of these 15-minute time segments to understand the type of segment and the volume to capacity ratios. So for this demonstration, we're going to look at applying a work zone configuration to see how we can use this tool. For the first step, propose work zone, if you click this edit work zone configuration button, you can apply a work zone. Once you check active work zone, you can select the work zone type, which is a one-lane closure. And then you can select the barrier type, which is concrete, and the rural area type. We're going to leave the other defaults as the default values. Once you click save, and then also you have to click this button next to show work zone D/C, you can see the work zone applied. You can also change the view of the screen by clicking horizontal split. And for the purpose of this exercise, I think it's easier to visualize. So now that we have this shown, we're going to look at one of these questions. What segments along the facility result in potential capacity constraints for a lane closure? As you can see here, many of these segments have capacity constraints. The dark red is a volume capacity ratio over 1.05. The pink color is when it's at capacity, and white is near capacity, slightly under 0.95, and blue is under capacity. The next question is, what is the estimated max volume to capacity ratio for a lane closure in segments 8 through 12? If we want to look at that, we can hover over and see that in the AM peak hour, segments 8 through 12 are around 1.15. In the PM peak hour, they're closer to 1.2 or 1.23. You can see additional information as well. Next, what percentage of time periods would be at or over capacity if a 24-hour lane closure was put in place in segments 8 through 12. To see this, we're going to use step 2, propose active hours. If we add a lane reservation overlay, we can maintain the 24-hour time period and then update this to be segments 8 through 12. Once that's applied, you can click step 3, summary, and you can view a summary of those periods. To answer the question, there are 21% or 100 periods over capacity for those segments in the 24-hour time period. You can also see a summary of this information on the bottom left-hand part of this screen. The next part of this tool I wanted to share was when we're looking at this next question, what are the allowable lane closure hours in segments 8 through 12 without exceeding capacity? So there's another part of this tool where you can select change view. And this is the reference start time for where the time periods on the left side of the screen start. If we look and if we update that to 7 o'clock p.m., we can see how the time kind of shifted on the left-hand side, and we can visualize that if we close the lane between 7 p.m. and before 6 a.m., that is the time period where there is, we would not exceed capacity with this lane closure. Whereas during the most of the part of the day, we would have impacts. So with this, I will now hand it back over to Ed to move on to the next presenter.
Okay, thanks, Alexandra. And before I pass it off to Bastian, I wanted to remind people that in the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a Q&A button. If you have any questions, you can ask those questions in there, and we have one question in there now, but which we'll get to at the end. But you could put questions in there, and then we'll get to them as much as we have time for. So with that, I will pass it off to Bastian. Bastian is a principal engineer for Kittleson, and he leads the company's firm-wide research practice. He has over 16 years of progressive experience in applied research and has a passion for developing solutions to complex problems across all areas of transportation. Bastian specializes in multimodal safety and operations of traffic systems at the intersection, corridor, network, and policy levels for local, state, and federal clients. He has led or co-led over 30 state and federal projects and has co-authored over 70 journal papers and conference proceedings. 7 of these papers were recognized as Best Paper Awards. He's been involved in the Highway Capacity Manual, and particularly the FREEWay section, for most of the 16 years. He was instrumental in developing the FREEVAL-PA tool. He's kind of the brains behind the FREEVAL-PA tool. He lives in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I'll turn it over to you, Bastian.
All right, thank you, Ed. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay. And Melissa, it doesn't seem like I can start my video because I think you stopped it earlier today. So if you are able to allow that. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and jump in. There we go. So Alexandra covered really the first half of the FREEVAL-PA tool, which is the sketch planning method intended to be applied easily, quickly. The detailed analysis is those of you who are familiar with the FREEWAY facilities method in the Highway Capacity Manual. That's really what we mean by the detailed method. So both have their application, and Shannon really gave you an overview of maybe which applies where. So what I'll do is I'll give a little bit more detail on kind of an overview of the method, talk through the inputs and outputs, how to interpret results, and then I'll, time permitting, I'll also do a quick on-screen example. So really the big difference is when we go to the detailed method is multiple segments and multiple time periods. So here's an example of what a facility could look like with 11 segments, combining on-ramps and off-ramps and weaving segments. And then the inputs and outputs of this method are provided in 15-minute time intervals. So it's a little bit more data intensive to set up, although we've put in a lot of shortcuts, if you will, and automation to get a facility populated more quickly. And similar to what Alexandra showed, it does allow for oversaturated and undersaturated conditions, including Q spillback. Really all the capabilities that are in the HCM 6th edition are integrated in this methodology. And so really the key here is alternatives analysis. So looking at an uninterrupted flow facility, a freeway facility, the HCM includes capabilities from managed lanes, active traffic management, like part-time shoulder use, ramp metering capabilities, work zone, which is a big component of what really PennDOT is interested in for this. But really, you can also look at just standard geometric improvements. So the impacts of widening, the impact of adding an auxiliary lane, or even the comparison between what if we widen or what if we just strengthen the shoulder and do a part-time shoulder use analysis. So all of these you can do within the FREEVAL-PA tool. So the building block of a facility are really these 4 segment types here. So a basic segment, an on-ramp or merge segment, a diverge or off-ramp segment, and a weaving segment. And the chapter numbers here are really those that are in the Highway Capacity Manual 6th edition that presumably many of you already have. And so I wanted to include this slide here because if you have further questions about the method and the computations in FREEVAL-PA, you can certainly go to the website and ask those questions, but you can also go directly to the Highway Capacity Manual because that's really where the underlying methodologies are described in a lot of detail. So the big motivation, why would we analyze a freeway as a facility as opposed to just an independent segment? And really the answer here is interaction. So you're seeing in this photo, you're starting to see brake lights from these vehicles. And if you look at the top of this hill, you see that there is queuing. And if this was a video in another 15 minutes or so, the queue would have spilled back into this segment. The underlying premise of the method is that the queuing in this front segment that we're looking at here, this basic segment, is not because this segment is over capacity, is because you have a downstream bottleneck with a lower capacity, and there's too much demand relative to that bottleneck capacity. The demand to capacity ratio exceeds 1, and therefore we see Q spillback. And that's really the premise underlying this method, is that we identify these active bottlenecks, but we also see the operational impact. So we see the Q spillback into upstream segments. And so the output really looks something like this. That's really at the heart of it. So what we call a kind of speed contour. So this extended time space domain where you have multiple segments. In this example, there's 34 and multiple time periods. We just have a subset shown here, but FREEVAL-PA allows you to go up to a full 24-hour analysis. So similar to what Alexandra showed for the planning method, you can look at midnight to midnight or really flexible time periods. And then in the interpretation, if you see a queue like this, really the key is that the bottleneck is what is just downstream of the queue. So segment 32 in this case is the one that I would start my investigation with to really get a sense of how maybe what is the demand to capacity ratio, what are some of the improvements that I might implement in segment 32 to prevent this queuing. So the key is that the mitigation doesn't happen where you see the queue, the mitigation happens just downstream of the queue. So the output can then be evaluated to get the maximum queue length. For work zone, that's a really important performance measures. A lot of times we're trying to minimize the work zone induced queuing, but obviously also just for any other analyses for alternatives, we want to know how long is the queue and how long does the congestion last. So the difference, getting queue duration as well as queue length are part of the outputs, as well as the travel times throughout the facility. And then you can also see the number numbers within each of these cells is the calculated speed. And so if you want more details, you can really get the full set of performance measures, speed, density, travel time for every time period in every segment. So a few key concepts to understand the detailed method is the difference between demand to capacity and volume to capacity. So the D over C ratio, demand of capacity ratio, is really a measure of the full demand that wants to flow through a facility. So whether that comes from an upstream traffic count station, whether that comes from your travel demand model outputs, and that value can exceed 1. So if demand exceeds capacity, that's useful to know, and also by how much does it exceed it. So that's a big difference between FREEVAL and microsimulation tool. In microsimulation, you just see, well, it's congested. FREEVAL will tell you it is a D over C of 1.05, meaning 5% over capacity, versus 1.3 or 30% over capacity. And the reason that's important is that it drives your mitigation strategy. Something that's 5% over capacity, for example, a ramp meter can help with that type of congestion. If it's 30% above capacity, you might look at a more traditional widening, but also a strategy like part-time shoulder use can really enhance capacity by 30%, going from 2 to 3 lanes, for example, where that would be a sufficient treatment. The volume to capacity ratio is then that is metered at the capacity of the bottleneck, and so that can never exceed 1.0. And so by comparing those two values, if the two are equal, we know the facility is undersaturated. All the demand can get processed. If the D over C exceeds the V over C, we know the facility is congested. The demand cannot get processed. That means a queue is building. And if the reverse is true, if the demand to capacity ratio is less than volume to capacity, that means the facility is recovering from congestion. So the demand has dropped, the volume is still there from the prior time periods. That means queues are clearing where more volume is being processed than would have been predicted in that particular time period from a demand perspective. So if we go back to that really simple facility of 11 segments, they each have their own segment length and number of lanes and lots of other inputs. You can interpret the outputs. So the top table is the demand to capacity ratios. And you're seeing here that within one of the time steps, time step 3, 3 of the segments have a D over C ratio of 1.1, and one of them has a demand to capacity ratio of 1.02, but several others are pretty close to capacity. When you look at the speed contours happen, the congestion is upstream of that bottleneck, similar to the example I showed earlier. And so when you're looking at mitigation, really, if you just widen segment 8 or improve segment 8, that's really not sufficient, because then the low speed will just move one segment down. So really the mitigation here is every single segment where demand exceeds capacity. So all 4 of these are the ones that need to either get widened or have some TISMO type strategy applied. We also distinguish this in the level of service contours, where we have the traditional density-based level of service. So level of service F being density that's greater than 45 passenger cars per mile per lane. So those are flagged here in the top chart. But then the bottom chart is just the segments where demand exceeds capacity. And so that's another easy diagnostic tool to see when and where does my facility exceed capacity. So when we're looking at work zones, the work zone capacities, so that's another key feature in FREEVAL-PA and the HCM method, is that when you're going and implementing a lane closure, it's not just that you lose the capacity of one lane, but you have the added friction that results from the construction, where, for example, a 3 to 2 lane closure has a net reduction in throughput of about 56%. So it's more severe than the 33% you might expect from just removing one lane. And so both of those are considered within the FREEVAL-PA tool, and both of these can get calibrated. For example, you know, a work zone with 12-foot lanes versus one with just 11 or 10-foot lanes, you can further reduce the capacity based on information you have available. So all this can be customized, and I'll show that in the on-screen demo by editing the capacities, editing the inputs, editing the demands for every time period and every segment. Before going to the on-screen demo, I wanted to, and Shannon mentioned this in the beginning, really talk about calibration. And so that's really a key distinguishing consideration between the planning method and the detailed method. The planning method is intended to be quick. So just demand to capacity ratio, volume to capacity ratio, a high-level sense of the congestion, time, and location. When we're going to predicting these actual performance measures, really the key is that the facility has to be calibrated based on probe data, for example, and that is achieved through modifying calibration factors, speed adjustment factors, capacity adjustment factors, and demand adjustment factors. And on the training website, on the FREEVAL-PA website, we actually have a series of training modules and examples, and we will be generating additional ones to really talk through the calibration. But an output of the calibration is shown in the bottom right here, where these are end-to-end travel times for a facility where we have the field data, so the solid line, which in this case, the field data was obtained from probe data, which also PennDOT has available. And if you haven't used the probe data before, you can request an account for your PennDOT projects so you can download the data versus the calibrated FREEVAL. And so really here, the key is that we're not just matching one travel time, but we're matching the end-to-end travel times in every time period. So in every 15-minute time slice, which then also includes the maximum travel time, but also kind of the duration of the congestion, because both of those are of interest. You can also calibrate visually by looking at the speed flow contours. So for example, on the left is a set of field data from probe data. It's pretty boxy looking because we only have one data point or one speed estimate for these long segments here between interchanges. In our FREEVAL outputs, we actually have a little more detailed where we see the true shockwave spilling back. And you're seeing here that you can do a visual calibration. You can also look at, for example, here, we have several segments in the beginning of the facility that have a slower speed even in the middle of the night. So this is midnight to midnight. And that's because this particular facility, this is actually up in Boston, is part of a tunnel section. So similar to the example that Shannon showed earlier, a tunnel will have very different capacities and free flow speeds. And so even that you can calibrate it, but the calibration isn't automatic. You have to use that based on your data input and to get that in the facility. Within the detailed method, once set up, you can look at every segment using a feature called the Segment Explorer, where you can get the demand and the demand to capacity ratio and other performance measures for every time period within the segment. You also have really the scenario analysis, and I'll show what that looks like, where you can, on the one hand, look at work zones, but you can look at many other factors as well. And then you have the detailed outputs. So you have report generation and different options there. So I went through all this relatively quickly because I really want to go to a case study. So I'm going to open FREEVAL here, getting to an existing facility, and then putting in a work zone lane closure, and give you a sense of kind of what the examples look like. I should mention that this example, as well as the ones that Alexandra went through and some other ones, are all part of the FREEVAL-PA training program that is available on the website. And so if this all moves a little bit quickly, you can also go and sign up for that training for free and really go through all the modules at your own pace. So in FREEVAL, instead of looking at the sketch planning analysis that Alexandra had looked at, I will go ahead and open a facility that I previously created. And it's actually that same facility that Shannon had introduced. So the stretch of US 222 north of Lancaster. So where you can see it has a Google Map integration. So I can scroll into the facility. I can highlight segments. I have a map view of the facility. And so can you really interact with any of the segments to really understand what the performance look like? You have lots of input features here where you can change your geometric inputs, the terrain types, the truck percentages, acceleration, deceleration lanes. So lots of opportunity here to change things. Lots of opportunities to calibrate capacities, where in this particular case, for example, there is a set of PennDOT default capacities that is also described more in the training that I can apply here. And what that one will do, it will reduce the capacity for some of the merge, diverge, and weaving segments to be a little bit more conservative. You can also edit your demand profiles, so similar to, and this is a true demand profile for this facility. So this is not one of the 3 defaults that Alexandra talked about, but this is one that we actually obtained from the PennDOT Tire website from one of the sensors, picked representative days, and then put that directly into the tool here. And there's copy and paste functionality to get the demands in here. You have the detailed calibration capabilities, which I'll skip in the interest of time. But again, this is described more in more detail on the website. And you can take a look at output dashboards. So this is a look of the facility without a work zone in place, where you again have a facility preview. You have information on the travel time by time period. Not very exciting here because you see everything is level service A and B. But if I jump down to, for example, show the demand to capacity ratios, you can kind of get a sense that this facility, the highest U over C is around 0.7. So it's about 30% below capacity. And as such, we don't really see any congestion. So when we look at the travel times, when we look at the facility speeds, we don't see much of an impact without the work zone. But if I want to go through and go to a work zone, I can define one here. I might call this work zone 1. There's a limit of 1 scenario for each instance of FREEVAL, but you can always save as and do another one. And so I can go into the scenarios, and you can see you can do work zones, you can do incidents, you can do weather. But if I go ahead and add a work zone to the facility, and I'll just do a 24-hour lane closure, so from midnight to midnight. And I'm going to do that at the end of the facility, which is, or segments 20 to 23, similar to some of the bridge locations that Shannon had mentioned. The work zone type is a lane closure with concrete barrier, and this is, I'm going to just call it a rural location because it's kind of not within Lancaster, it's a little bit outside of it. And you have other settings that you can change, like the lateral distance and the work zone speed limit. So relatively quick to configure, and if I hit save, I can now go ahead and view the outputs. And really just within, a matter of minutes, I now have my base facility, which in this case was already set up and calibrated, but I was now able to run a work zone scenario where I can now, in these output charts now, in the scenario dashboard, we see a side-by-side comparison, or a comparison within the same chart of what the free flow travel time and the scenario travel time is. I also see the impact on the level of service. If I look at now that same demand to capacity ratio, I see now that the work zone exceeds capacity for just a few time periods in the AM peak and a few time periods in the PM peak. And you can mix and match these performance measures to see them side by side and really explore and interact with these different charts. You can look at queue percentages. In this particular case, there isn't much queuing evident on the facility, but you can get and anytime you hover over it, you see what the resulting percent queue length is, or what the resulting queue length in miles is, for example. So the queue length in this case about 0.9, so just less than a mile is the maximum queue length. If I scroll down, you see that there's a lot of other performance measures that you can get, information on the user cost, the average travel time, kind of the maximum demand to capacity ratio, but then also really detailed speed contours, whereas, for example, for the base facility, you're seeing here that most of the speeds, so again, each cell is the speed in that segment at that time period. There isn't too much happening here. But if I go to the work zone scenario, you can now begin to see where the work zone results in a bottleneck in the AM peak period. So the queue starts at around 6:45 in the morning and lasts for about 3 hours. It's not a very long queue, but it's a long-lasting queue. And then there's another occurrence of a little bit shorter queue, but in the PM peak period. A lot of these graphs are scalable, where you can, for example, zoom out. So if you don't want to see the numbers and you just want to see the visuals comparing the base inputs to the work zone. And you can also change all of these to get different performance measures. So for example, if you want to see the density on the facility, you can get those plots. So it's very interactive, and everything in here, you can copy and paste the information out. You can export it into Excel, or you can generate the PDF report to then get a standard formatted PDF document, just so that every one of your analyses looks more or less the same. So this was a very quick overview. Again, there is a lot more information available on the website that we encourage you to really check out. In the interest of time, I think I will stop my presentation here, which will allow about 10 minutes to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, and we do have some questions coming in, Bastian, so I'll start at the beginning. And I don't know if you're able to look at the questions, but Becky Bureau has a question. In the sketch planning tool, how do you decide what value to use for the work zone capacity adjustment factor? And is there a standard or default value for shoulder closure and or lane closure?
Yeah, it looks like Alexandra is still on mute, so I'll maybe get that started. So there are defaults. So the Highway Capacity Manual 6th edition has default values for work zone lane closures. And so in the right now, actually those are defaulted for the HCM values. In some testing that we've been doing over the past few weeks that some of you have been involved with, we will provide additional flexibility for the detailed method to customize your own capacities. But then in the sketch planning methods, there are some defaults, and then you can also override your own if you have your own information.
Okay, the next question is from Jim Cullison, I think with RKK. Will the calibration tool from FREEVAL, North Carolina be added to FREEVAL-PA, and will the export seed to text file also be added to FREEVAL-PA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so so FREEVAL-NC, so there is a tool that North Carolina DOT uses that has a lot of similarities, but also some significant differences, including just the general interface, and the whole planning level feature isn't there. So that's what the question is referring to. And there really isn't an automated calibration tool in the North Carolina version either. It's a matter of what is possible to do is to, if you have a set of probe data, that you can upload that into FREEVAL, and so that same, I didn't show it in the demo, but that same capability exists within the calibration capability. So as you go to your calibration inputs, you are able to do what's called travel time comparison, and so you're able to load in your field observed travel times to then do that direct comparison. So it's not an auto calibration, but it assists visually with the calibration. So you don't have to copy and paste to Excel or another tool a bunch of times. So that's already in there.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Chad Martin. My understanding of probe data is somewhat limited, but if it's coming from GPS cell phone data, how does this correlate to actual traffic volumes over a roadway segment or a work zone capacity? Is there a standard process of adjusting this probe data to come up with ADT or work zone capacity?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of data sets, there's really two pieces. On the one hand, there is the performance, so the speed and travel time data, and then there are the volumes. So what probe data will give you is only the outputs that you need for calibration. So it'll give you your speeds, it'll give you your travel time, you can get speed contours, you can get queue lengths. Probe data will not give you volumes. So for volumes, PennDOT has the tire website. So those are the roadway sensors. And so you can use those on your facility. You can pull the information, you know, in 15-minute bins and hourly bins. You can get your ADTs. So all that information. So you will need both the probe data to get the outputs, but also the tire website. Now, if you want to do an analysis more quickly and you don't have time maybe to get the detailed volumes pulled from the website, you can use, to get a quick estimate, you can use an ADT and multiply that ADT out by one of the volume profiles. But you also have to recognize the limitations of that is in an approximation, and certainly for a true project, I would recommend getting the actual volume similar to the way you would do for, you know, an HCM analysis or a micro simulation analysis.
Okay, thanks, Bastian. Next question is from Becky Biro again. When entering traffic data for a facility that has already been segmented and in FREEVAL, is there a way to add a heavy vehicle percentage? I saw the input in the sketch planning analysis, but I wasn't able to find it when inputting data into the corridor segments.
Yeah, so that is available. It's in the under the project info, under the oh, sorry, it should be under the demands. Yeah, so it should be in there as an input capability. And if it's not, then that is a real oversight and we need to add it. Let me get back to you and get that one, get that offline. But yes, so the truck percentages is something that you should be able to enter and change.
Okay. Okay, the next question is from Miguel de la Riva. How does FREEVAL update the underlying traffic volume pattern profiles?
So I was taking some notes. So you have the ability in the detailed method, you have the ability to change your profile for any segment. And what it ultimately will do is it will keep track of those volumes within each 15-minute time period, right? So if you have an ADT of 50,000 vehicles and 10% is in a certain hour, so that's 5,000 vehicles, and then a quarter of that is in the 15 minutes. If in the next downstream segment, an on-ramp, you know, 200, 300 vehicles get added, then those get just added together. So it's you are able to customize the inputs for each segment, and then FREEVAL will do the internal record keeping. And so the only thing you need to put in is the demands. So if you think of kind of each almost drawing a cordon line around the facility, so all the entry points and all the exit points, you specify the demand. FREEVAL will do all the internal computations.
Okay. This next question might be geared towards either Brian or Dan Farley. It is, can FREEVAL do road users liquidated damages?
It can be used for that. However, the existing process with road users liquidated damages has not been changed. We are working with the Bureau of Project Delivery, who owns road users liquidated damages in that worksheet. Once FREEVAL-PA is out for everyone to use, you know, then we will be looking to get that finalized with Project Delivery. Okay.
Thanks, Brian. Next question is, will the FREEVAL-PA analysis take the place of the delay analysis workbooks for projects currently under design? And I think that's what I was referring to at the beginning. It will replace that the delay analysis workbooks, correct, Brian?
More or less, yes. I mean, if folks choose to continue to use the delay analysis workbook, as long as it's meeting the requirements of the Highway Capacity Manual 6th edition, as it currently does, that's fine. However, FREEVAL, as we've just went through this presentation, is a much more powerful tool, and is going to get more accurate results in our minds, and it's going to be kept up to date better. So we think this should be the first preference tool, as it is, like I said, more powerful. Now, as far as projects that are currently under design, we're working right now with our IT department to get the tool as well as the website vetted through their security protocols. We're working through that right now. We're moving along. The staff that we're working with the security team has been very helpful in trying to get this moved along. They understand, the importance of getting this out. So we anticipate having this ready, within the next, month or so, hopefully. And then certainly once we get this through the security protocols and it is out on the software center for everyone to download within the department, we will obviously be putting together the strike-off letter that's going to announce the use of this. And we anticipate from the date of the strike-off letter, the effective date of using the tool for all projects would be roughly 3 months.
Okay, thanks. One question, will FREEVAL allow to enter COVID volume adjustment factors for 2020? My guess is that's going to have to be a manual adjustment, but Bastian, go ahead. And
yeah, and so just to, since I didn't spend much time on this, but so this is the demand input window where there's an ADT that came from tire, and in this particular case, it's the distribution for that particular location. What I would recommend is, so you could either change the ADT or you can put this ADT scaling factor in there. So if you're saying, for example, traffic is down by 10%, you see that the chart gets updated automatically, where you then begin to see what the differences are, right? Or you can go to a 20% reduction, and that way you can leave a note that this is COVID induced, and then you can take it out at some point. And so by the same token, you can put a future growth factor in here as well. So that's how I would recommend doing that. So there's no COVID button, but the demands you can change flexibly, in this window.
one last question that came in the chat box, not the Q&A box. Does FREEVAL translate, or will it be associated with the current PennDOT RULD spreadsheet? That's probably a question for Brian or Dan, and I think we've already answered that, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, we answered that here about 2 or 3 questions back. And again, it goes back to, once FREEVAL-PA is out, we're going to work with project delivery to have that process, updated and finalized related to their RELD spreadsheet.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions. So appreciate everyone's time in attending this, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks.